Hello and welcome to the video version of Technology in Space, located at technologyandspace.com. I speak with experts about space history, exploration, business, and commercialization. I'm Chris Alvarez, and thank you for watching. I'm speaking with Ben Pring, co-author of Monster, a tough love letter on taming the machines that rule our jobs, lives, and future, published March 16, 2021, today by Wiley. Thank you for speaking with me.
Thanks, Chris. Great to be with you.
So first, how did you get into studying this subject and writing a book about it?
Well, I've been a tech analyst all my career, more years than I care to remember now. Worked for Gartner for many years, and I've been working for Cognizant, which is a big technology consulting company, for 10 years now. I set up this group called the Center for the Future of Work. So we've written books, a couple of other books about leading edge technology in the last few years. We wrote a book back in 2014 all about what's sort of come to be known now as the digital fingerprint, you know, all the code that's created by every interaction that you have, which is sort of well understood now, wasn't very well understood a few years ago. Then we wrote a book in 2017 about the rise of AI and how important that was going to be. And again, that's kind of common knowledge now, but a few years ago it wasn't really as obvious. And so this new book, Monster, is really taking a slightly different look at it, looking at these sort of leading edge technologies and how perhaps they're going a little bit off the rails, if you like. Okay. Some of the things that we have been evangelizing and sort of talking about the promise and the benefit and the upside of that, we can begin to see some of the downsides. And rather than kind of running away from those downsides and that dark side, if you like, we thought it behooved us as people who had been, you know, telling this story for some time to kind of dig into this and to try and address where things seem to be going a little bit wrong to make sure we get it back on track.
So a few of the things I noticed in going through the book material was, you know, you talk about people's concerns about surveillance, losing their jobs to automation, sort of the, like you said, the data fingerprints that people leave, you know, how is that being used? Again, that goes into the surveillance.
Yeah.
Is the book geared, who is the book geared towards?
It's really geared for anybody who loves technology. You know, we start off by saying we love technology, and we call the book a tough love letter to technology. We love technology. I'm sure most people listening to this now, watching this now, love technology. We know how positive, how powerful it's been. We can see how it's contributed to economic growth and job security and, you know, just the world becoming better in many aspects. But we can also, if we're honest and we're not kind of just Pollyannish about it, and we don't sort of try to just tell one side of the story, see that there are things, like you say, where, you know, it is more questionable what's going on. You know, that data fingerprint, that's the key to personalize an experience for you online. You know, we know you like this book, you're going to like this book, and that's kind of benign, and we all get that. But at the same time, the flip side of that, as you say, is that people can basically track us and they can surveil us. And so I think we've got to think about that. So really, the reader, anybody who's thinking about these things, anybody who, again, feels a personal, a corporate, a societal responsibility to steer into these issues rather than kind of run away from them.
And I noticed also that apart from just laying out the dangers and concerns, you also have steps forward, ways in which to mitigate the problem. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. No, we have a range of sort of recommendations, things that we'd like to see, and certainly there's sort of provocations, if you like, to try and make people think about this. No, we felt it was very important for us as authors. This isn't kind of just us moaning and bitching and shaking our fist at stuff and saying, "Oh my God, it was back, you know, better back in the day." Again, it was us trying to acknowledge the reality of what's going on. And present some ideas about how we can sort of get back on top of this, tame the monster. And they really kind of range from what you might think of more as sort of attitudinal things, soft things.
Mhm.
We call out that we shouldn't forget the golden rule, which we seem to have forgotten online.
Mhm.
We do things online now behind a cloak of anonymity that we wouldn't do in the real world. And, the golden rule, treat others as you'd like to be treated yourself. We've sort of, society, individuals have sort of forgotten that. So there are soft things like that,
Mhm.
cultural, attitudinal things, but then there are very hard legislative things, like we're calling for the repeal of Section 230. We're calling for a age ban on the use of social media.
Mhm.
So under 18 shouldn't be on social media, we believe. We're
Mhm.
calling for the establishment of what we call a federal federal technology administration
Right.
that supersedes and overrides the FCC and the FTC,
Mhm.
both of which, for people who know the charters of those organizations, don't really have a charter to look at this sort of technology in this sort of detail. So
Mhm.
yeah, we're trying to have a kind of manifesto-based approach to it, some ideas, big picture ideas, but then undergird that with some very real recommendations.
How would you so obviously in tech there's a huge uh group or crowd that loves tech because of anonymity and because it's a free for all, and
Yeah.
the rules you propose go contrary, run contrary to what a lot of them want, which is restrictions on what can be said, who's online. How would you address that?
Well, anonymity was a key element of the growth of the internet in the first place, and we freely acknowledge that.
Mhm.
And that served that first 25 years or so of the development of the internet pretty well. I mean, it's a key element of why the internet has become what it is. But we can also see, let's take a time out after 25 years,
Mhm.
that anonymity, the downside of that is that it's allowing trolling at an individual level. It's allowing fake news at a societal level. And those things, and that anonymity is now it's undermining people's psychology, addiction, body dysmorphia, the fact that anybody can say anything horrible about anybody else under this cloak. We can see what's happened in the sort of political sphere, people going down the kind of the rabbit hole of an algorithmically driven echo chamber and landing up in some crazy ideas, which then burst out into the real world. We saw that recently in Washington. So
Mhm.
we think that the notion of free speech, which of course we support and completely support, is central, but you have to own your free speech.
Mhm.
When you go into the physical public sphere, you own that. You are who you are, and people can see who you are, either kind of at a micro level or in a sort of in a legal sense. We can see who you are, and
Mhm.
we think we need to take that philosophy, which has served mankind pretty well for a few thousand years. We
Mhm.
need to bring that into this online world because, frankly, the libertarian, free for all, laissez faire, back off kind of model, it
Mhm.
just doesn't scale anymore. We can see that we've got to create rules of the road, if you like, for the information superhighway.
Mhm.
And one of them is one of the central ones is I don't think we can sustain this notion of anonymity anymore.
Mhm. How about, is it possible to have sort of um, two worlds where you have the free for all, the laissez-faire, and you have a controlled environment where people can sort of choose where they want to be?
Well, I think again that's sort of the underlying philosophy of what we've tried so far, and again we see the downsides of that. So I don't think we can, in essence, create a two-speed internet, one
Mhm.
kind of model, the official internet, and then the dark web.
Mhm.
I think we've got to clean up the whole thing, frankly.
Hmm. Okay. So, one of the things I focus on in this podcast is space exploration,
Yeah.
technology. So, one of the questions I have about automation taking over jobs is how that applies to sort of graduate level work or engineering work, the
Yeah.
more cerebral, for lack of a better term. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah. No, I mean, that was really in a way what we addressed in some detail in our last book, which was called "What to Do When Machines Do Everything," and it was exactly this central idea of the role of automation and this, very real concern that people have got about, automation taking human labor away from us all. I think that the it's an interesting way you phrase that question, Chris, and I think again, probably for everybody who's listening to this now, watching this now, who's interested in leading edge things, leading edge tech things, leading edge, particularly very, leading edge stuff like space exploration and the next kind of chapter of that. I think the simple truth is that probably the vast majority of that audience is to a degree technical already. They're probably, I don't want to mischaracterize your audience, but they're probably kind of math-centric people who've gone up STEM-based kind of educational routes and are now working, broadly in a kind of STEM-related field. And I think the simple truth is for those people, there has never been a better time to be alive. And automation is not something that's going to replace any of those people. It's going to be a tool to allow them to do the next level of whatever it is they're interested in. I mean, automation technology is going to be, and robotics and AI and quantum and everything like that is going to be hugely central to building the world that we've seen in science fiction movies. And I'm sure I love Star Trek, live long and prosper, etc. That's all completely going to be enhanced and taken to the next level through a lot of this kind of automation technology. The real issue, I think, and it's interesting because it sort of bubbles up in the media a lot, journalists, politicians, policy people, is that they are typically not math people. They are typically more liberal arts kind of people who have not gone up in that STEM world. And the real issue in automation is what should the liberal art majors do about automation? Because their jobs are much more under real threats from this technology than the techie people. The techie people are going to be fine. It's the philosophers and English majors and historians and classicists who are, and they're typically the journalists, they're typically the politicians. They really feel this fear, I think, much more than the techie nerdy people. So, I mean, that's a very real question. I mean, think about journalism as one example. I mean, in the UK, where I come from, although I live here in the States now, I think it's a crazy high number. I mean, journalism as a profession has sort of collapsed in the last 20, 30 years as a result of the internet in a way, and the migration of ad spending online. But the UK is still graduating about 35,000 journalists from its universities every year.
Wow.
And so if you think about that imbalance, that's a crazy imbalance. And those people, they're not going to find a job in journalism because, again, for many of your listeners and watchers will know, a lot of journalism is using automated-based writing software now to create a story. A lot of sports stories are created by automation-based software, and if you're following things like GPT-3 closely, you'll know that software can write, a passage, a paragraph, a whole long article that Alan Turing wouldn't be able to distinguish between whether it was a machine or a person. Right. So the question of that automation question, I think, is more real outside really of this audience of people who are using technology to make the things, that we've dreamt of for many years really come true.
I'm speaking with Ben Pring, co-author of Monster, A Tough Love Letter on Taming the Machines That Rule Our Jobs, Lives, and Future. You can find more information on his work at cognizant.com/future tech of tech work. If you like this episode of Technology in Space so far, please subscribe and hit the like button. If you'd like more books and information on space history or the science, technology, and business of space, check out my YouTube channel, Spacewalks Money Talks, my podcast, Technology in Space, and my website, technologyandspace.com. If you're looking for military history and general history, including true crime, please check out my YouTube channel, War Scholar, my podcast, Military History Inside Out, and my webpage, warscholar.org or militaryhistorypodcast.com. If you're looking for fiction, including sci-fi, horror, fantasy, mysteries, thrillers, film history, gaming, and more, please check out my YouTube channel, Chris Alvarez Full Contact Nerd, my podcast, Full Contact Nerd Interviews, and my webpage, chrisalvarez.com or fullcontactnerd.com. Now back to the video. So let me throw an example at you that maybe straddles the seam.
Yeah.
So I have a friend who's a radiologist, a doctor who uses imaging software. He believes that in 15 years, radiologists aren't going to be needed because AI can pretty much read X-rays and images sufficiently well enough, and that's a scientific sort of endeavor. So what would you say to that?
No, there's a degree of truth in that, although that fear in medical fields has been around for a while and it hasn't really come true. But I think, again, this is going to be the notion, in lots of jobs, including technology jobs, is yes, there are going to be elements, tasks, if you like, that become increasingly automated away. But I think the role of a radiologist, the skill of a radiologist, the ability for the radiologist to do new things, not just sort of be in one box and that's the only box, I think that's going to outrun the technology for a long period of time. And then the other issue, of course, is that the growth of that technology, the deployment of that technology, the availability of that technology is potentially, and this is the best case scenario, going to allow that radiologist, rather than seeing 6 people a day, to see 60 people a day. And to spread that technology, if you like, into a wider area, not just in the liberal kind of elites of the coasts and expensive centers like that, but to spread healthcare more broadly into underserved parts of America and the world. So I think if you constrain that radiologist's job into a very tight box and don't think about the expansion of that box, then you can come very easily to a scenario in which that box becomes replaced increasingly by the technology. But I think what people miss frequently is that the radiologist is going to expand the box using the technology, and ultimately, that radiologist's job will be different, but I think we'll still be here for the foreseeable future.
Mm-hmm. It makes me wonder, so again, with medicine, in this example, they're graduating too many people. I agree with what you say, you can do different things, but there are also too many radiologists. So just thinking in the future, how many different new jobs can be created that utilize people using their minds in these ways?
Well, again, I think that's something that the pessimists and perhaps the dystopians sort of miss a little bit, and certainly in our perspective, is that sense that the technology, automation technology, machine learning technology can only take jobs away from humans, misses the other side of the equation, which it's going to create lots of new jobs and extend new jobs and new work and new tasks for humans. We've done a series of reports at the Center for the Future of Work in the last few years called Jobs of the Future. We did a first report called 21 Jobs of the Future. We've done 21 more Jobs of the Future. We've done 21 marketing jobs of the future, 21 HR jobs of the future. So we're coming up on 100 new jobs that we've imagined, and we've written them all in the form of job descriptions to sort of take them from the theoretical into the practical that somebody might be hiring against that job description. So we can think of lots of new jobs that have emerged since we've been thinking about this. I mean, a lot of the kind of things that we dreamt of are coming real now. One would be something that we thought up of a few years ago called an algorithm auditor. The notion that, we don't want to live in a black box world where the algorithm approves your mortgage but rejects mine, and the company who's using that algorithm can't tell you why you've been rejected or why you've been approved. So the notion of having an audit function on top of an algorithm, that's a new job. And there are companies that are hiring that type of job right now. So we think that the ultimate survivability of the human race is our curiosity, our desire to to see around the corner, what's around the river bend. I mean, I think that's a motivating factor in the desire to push out into outer orbit and into space. I mean, that fundamental underlying curiosity is what's driving Bezos and Musk and others to want to go to the moon and to Mars, because they have a insatiable curiosity, and that curiosity at a more kind of mundane, practical, earthbound level, that's how new work is created. And of course, ultimately, the biggest sort of driver of innovation, as we all know, is necessity. So if we can sense that human work is being automated, we'll have the fundamental motivation and desire to create new work, we think.
Yeah. So let me address, I think in the book you also mentioned universal wealth or universal income. I think I'm messing up the term, but basically I think it's a minimum income for each person. Am I getting that right?
Well, yeah. So, yeah, the phrase that people might have heard is UBI, Universal Basic Income. And Andrew Yang, who ran on in the Democratic race ahead of the presidential election, that was a key plank of his sort of platform. We talk about that a little bit. We're not huge fans of UBI, to be honest with you, Chris. That's not something we're advocating, but it's certainly an idea that's floating out there, and some people are advocates for it. We think, frankly, that UBI in a way has sort of been tried in different parts of the world. Norway and Saudi Arabia as examples, because of their huge oil wealth in the last 40 or 50 years, have basically had a form of UBI. The state has basically been, offering out dividends from that oil petro wealth to fund people through the dole, as I'd call it, unemployment payments. And that hasn't, frankly, got a great track record in those countries. There are a lot of critics of that in those countries where they've seen what that's done to a generation of kids who have sort of lost motivation, haven't wanted to get out of bed in the morning, and haven't ended up in a particularly happy place as a result of that. Alcoholism levels in those, certainly in Norway, are off the charts. And without getting too sort of political about it, I think you can see some of the sort of disenfranchised youth in the Middle East. That's had geopolitical implications, obviously, in America and elsewhere in the last couple of decades. So, there's certainly some argument to be made around UBI. It's not one we're particularly, positive about, and it's only one we sort of touch on marginally in our book.
I brought it up because it brought to mind sort of, again, a pessimistic idea of, with all this automation, you have the rich, maybe going up into space, living in space, and everyone else living in squalor on the earth, getting a little futuristic.
Well, there's that great Matt Damon movie, Elysium. People will know that's kind of basically the idea of that. And that is something that we talk about, this separating of kind of the digital winners from the digital laggards. And, if you live in a zip code full of code now, life's probably never been better. You're living your best life. You look at the valuations of all the big tech companies in the last year or so, it's sort of extraordinary. And if you live in a zip code, not full of code, a kind of analog town, then you have fallen behind. You've fallen sort of by the wayside. And again, without getting overly political about it, I think you can clearly kind of see where a lot of the animus in the political sphere in the last few years has come from. People who feel excluded, left behind, forgotten about, are sort of rising up and, understandably saying, what about us? So those societal issues, that sort of separation of winners and losers, the K-shaped recovery, as people are talking about the economic kind of recovery in the Western world at the moment. You know, if you have that digital channel to market, if you've got a strong digital online presence, you're probably doing very well. That's the part of the K you're on. And if you're kind of a old line retailer, you know, that's the shape of your recovery. So it is a very real issue. And this sort of symbiosis now between big tech and big money, I think, again, for people who love tech but don't want to see tech take society off the rails, again, I think this is something we need to kind of grapple with.
And I think in your book you also mentioned the idea of D7 replacing G7. Is that
Yeah,
can you
yeah.
touch on that? Where would the data is it data that it stands for, the D?
Yeah, digital seven.
D7.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, if you think about the G7, that was sort of created in the post Second World War era,
Mhm,
and it sort of represented power as it existed in the world in 1946, 1947.
mhm,
But if you were kind of to recraft that now in 2021, I
mhm,
mean, would you, no disrespect, but would you have Canada in that? Would you have France in that? I mean, it's questionable. You probably wouldn't. But
mhm,
would you have China in that? Would you have India in that?
mhm,
Would you have Facebook in that?
mhm, mhm,
Maybe you would. So the G7 is sort of trying to hold on to power,
mhm,
but in a way, power has sort of slipped away from many of those countries. If you look at the top 20 technology companies in the world by market capitalization, none of them are European.
mhm.
But yet Europe is a central part of the G7. So again, that was just a little mental exercise to say that because of the rise of digital technology and that explosion of wealth, with that wealth comes power. And in a way, if you sort of zoom out, you know, and look at the world as you're doing in your virtual backdrop there,
Yeah.
you know, the world as you'd see it today doesn't look quite as the world as it was in 1946. And we still have the sort of infrastructural pillars of the world
Mhm.
based on that old post Second World War model.
So what about the strength of Western countries, sort of the legal, the strength of their legal systems, where you can feel more comfortable that contracts will be honored and governments won't do something funny to your business, which I think is still some of the fear in China that people have.
Yeah, again, this is something we talk about in the book quite a bit, this notion of the splinter net, as it's being called.
Mhm,
You know, this idea that the original internet, in essence, an American internet, is changing and it's splintering into a kind of European GDPR driven internet where the rules of that road, that rules of that information superhighway are quite different to the rules in America.
mhm,
And then clearly the Chinese based internet, which is again very different from what Europeans are experiencing and Americans are experiencing. So, yeah, I mean, again, part of the strength and the reason for the growth of the internet in the last 25 years
mhm,
and the fact it could spread all around the world was because it was very free, it was very open. It
mhm,
was, as we were talking about earlier on, very laissez-faire, very few rules. But now it's being so central to growth and to opportunity and to security and to the future.
mhm,
Understandably, different territories, different regulatory frameworks are sort of becoming more and more important.
mhm.
And this becomes an issue, you know, for big companies like Cognizant and any big multinational organization that anybody, again, listening or watching might be working in,
Mhm,
because you're basically going to have to run three different policies
mhm,
within your, you know, international portfolio of business. You're going to have to follow rules of the road for Europe and then different rules in China, and it's going to be very complicated. It's going to certainly produce a field day for lawyers. They're not going to be automated
Aha.
away anytime soon.
So it seems interesting that the digital world, the cyber world, is still very grounded in sort of geography, where your infrastructure is located, the actual people and legal systems like which country you're in. It's still very. I don't. That's more a comment than a question.
Yeah,
I don't
no,
know
I
if you
agree.
have any.
Again, and I think that's the tension that you're seeing in a way. Again, the sort of utopian idea of the internet and the internet philosophers of that early era was that, virtual space was going to kind of replace physical space, but physical space, geography, place, terroir, whatever you want to call it, is fighting back. And again, I think this explains a lot of the tensions. Geopolitical tensions, societal tensions. I mean, again, think about tax. Not a very interesting subject to talk about,
Mhm.
but the tax frameworks in different countries are sort of rubbing up against the tax frameworks for the internet, and again explains why we were trying to support the fledgling internet and the fledgling internet providers of a generation ago,
Mhm.
but now the big digital behemoths pay very little tax anywhere around the world and sort of float around and make huge revenues and huge profits, but don't really contribute in the way that a business in a main street or a business in a mall has to do. So that's all going to be worked out. But in the working out of that's going to be a lot of turbulence and a lot of tension.
Mhm. I'm speaking with Ben Pring, co-author of Monster, A Tough Love Letter on Taming the Machines That Rule Our Jobs, Lives, and Future. You can find more information on his work at cognizant.com/future tech of tech work. If you like this episode of Technology in Space so far, please subscribe and hit the like button. If you'd like more books and information on space history or the science, technology, and business of space, check out my YouTube channel, Spacewalks Money Talks, my podcast, Technology in Space, and my website, technologyandspace.com. If you're looking for military history and general history, including true crime, please check out my YouTube channel, War Scholar, my podcast, Military History Inside Out, and my webpage, warscholar.org or militaryhistorypodcast.com. If you're looking for fiction, including sci-fi, horror, fantasy, mysteries, thrillers, film history, gaming, and more, please check out my YouTube channel, Chris Alvarez Full Contact Nerd, my podcast, Full Contact Nerd Interviews, and my webpage, chrisalvarez.com or fullcontactnerd.com. Now back to the video. So let me ask about it's not, I don't think you mentioned it in this book, but you did send me the 21 places of the future. I
Yeah,
think it's titled, and outer space was one, and it mentioned, tourism.
yeah.
And I'm also wondering about, asteroid mining, which is well in the future.
Yeah.
But how about, is there any mirror between the digital centers and where space activities would come from on the Earth?
Yeah. No, yeah. So that report, 21 Places of the Future, sort of looks now in this post-COVID era at where are going to be the new growth areas, beyond Silicon Valley, beyond New York, beyond London, where are going to be the new growth areas? And yeah, we called out space as a place of the future, because I think it is very easy and very appropriate, I think, to draw the sort of parallel between the explorers of the 16th century, venturing out from London and Amsterdam and Cadiz and Spain into the New World, and finding places that eventually became New York or Boston or Hong Kong or Sydney, and really where we are now with space exploration. 50 years plus after Neil Armstrong kind of stood on the moon, we're still just edging out now, really, to take the next big step. And again, if you sort of relate that to digitization, clearly two of the key players in this, akin really are modern day kings, modern day royalty, in the way that the Spanish and English kings and queens funded Columbus and Raleigh and Drake and all these people. Musk and Bezos are funding this next wave of exploration, and in the process of doing that, in the course of clearly not the next couple of years, but the next couple of decades,
Mhm.
it's going to be incredible. It's going to be an extraordinary period in which we begin to uh, create a huge range of new jobs,
Mhm.
potentially huge new wealth. And you mentioned about asteroid mining. I think Ted Cruz said he thought that the world's first trillionaire would make his trillions or her trillions in space doing exactly that. So it's a kind of crazy idea, but no more crazy than Columbus setting off from Spain and eventually the United States happening.
Mhm. So it's interesting. So with the digital world, sort of the barriers of entry, I think, are a lot lower for someone to, or had been, for someone to get involved in the digital economy. Whereas
Yeah,
contrasting that with space, which requires, billionaires
yeah,
putting their money forward to
yeah,
make it happen. So I'm just curious about the sort of the comparison and contrast between these two economies, these two
yeah.
types of economic activities.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. No, I mean, everybody, well, most people have now got the means of production
Mhm.
physically in their own hands. You don't need to go to a factory, you don't need to go to a city, you can do it in your basement. Um, and so that's for 20 of the places of the future, that's very true. For this place of the future, no, you're absolutely right. This is still very capital intensive initiative, and yeah, it's going to be the government, it's going to be federal governments around the world, and then it's going to be a few people with the odd $100 billion in their back pocket who can fund this sort of thing. One thing that we talk about in our report and in this profile of space as a place of the future is,
Mhm.
again, if you're a techie kind of nerdy person, a STEM based math based person, and you're looking for a job,
Mhm.
just look at the job openings page on blueorigin.com,
Mhm.
Bezos's space exploration company. I mean, there's hundreds of jobs there,
Mhm.
hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of jobs. And in fact, not all technical jobs, jobs for lawyers, jobs for accountants, jobs for HR people, jobs for ops people, logistics people,
Mhm.
web designers. Again, that's going to be a huge wave in the next, certainly the rest of our lifetime and
Mhm.
the rest of anybody's lifetime that's listening or watching this now. If you can put your personal surfboard on that wave, you're going to have a hell of a ride.
Mhm. Will the digital world, will it still have people becoming billionaires using creating digital businesses that sort of in a way seem to impoverish other people, say like Amazon putting all the mom and pop businesses out of business, making things cheaper and easier to buy for consumers, but still a whole strata of society is left behind.
Mm.
Do you Are we still going to have, as we move forward and let's say we implement the changes that you suggest, can we still have digital billionaires doing stuff like space exploration, or will it become more spread out, the wealth or the
Yeah,
benefits?
yeah. No, I mean, again, our position is that, yeah, if somebody makes $1 billion from a great idea, terrific. We're all for that.
Mhm.
We're not closet Marxists here saying that we've got to shut this whole thing down.
Mhm.
But we're saying we've got to reform some aspects of what's going on at the moment
Mhm.
to, in fact, prevent some worst case scenario of those people being left behind getting really angry and coming with their pitchforks
Mhm. Yeah.
to us all. Because when they do come with their pitchforks, they're not going to be able to distinguish between you or I
Mhm.
with our mere hundreds of thousands or whatever you've got, whatever I've got,
Mhm.
and those billionaires. We're all going to look the same to those guys.
Right.
So I think it behooves us. I think we have a motivation here to try and make sure we don't get to the kind of ugly scenario.
Mhm.
So no, we're not trying to suggest that. In fact, we very much believe and very much argue that if you can apply digital technology to whatever it is you do, that's probably the surest route
Mhm.
to economic success, economic security at the moment. Again, that notion of if you live in a zip code full of code, you're probably doing quite well. We want to get more people into that zip code and spread that digital opportunity, that digital technology, that digital skill
Mhm.
so people have the means of production and can do fabulous things. That's a kind of pro-innovation, pro-growth, pro-spreading wealth argument. But again, where we can see that a generation of people are not sending the elevator back down when they've kind of got to the top of the penthouse suite, but in fact pulling that the ladder up, if you like, mixing my metaphors here. That's what we're again calling out, that we can't continue to do that. We can't continue just to see platform-based economics, as people talk about in technology, just to soak up all the wealth and make it go up. I mean, again, we can see that happening a little bit, and that's worrying. And again, hence why we're sort of ringing this alarm bell.
Does your book, does Monster address educating people so that more and more people have the proper training and mindset to utilize digital tools? And
Yeah, that's exactly right, Chris, and that's exactly what the book is about. It's exactly, frankly, what Cognizant is doing at the moment. We're committing a lot of money to $250 million to exactly that, to support training and education-based programs around the world. Because ultimately, that is the answer. Every individual, every organization, every society that's risen through history has done that on the back of having, an educated workforce or being an educated person. And ultimately, it's always been the case, and it always will be, that the greatest number of smart people win. I mean, that's really the argument. The smartest people and the most of them is how you're going to rise. So yeah, we want to completely, again, help and play a small part in helping to, again, point to people a vision of the future, to say where it's going a little bit wrong, so we can get it back into a healthy spot, and then help people to go on this journey. That's why we talk about jobs of the future. That's why we talk about places of the future. We're trying to help people to realize that this is an incredible moment in human history when technology is creating incredible opportunity, incredible wealth, improving a lot of aspects of society. Let's get more people involved in that, and ultimately we'll all benefit from that.
are there other themes in the book that we haven't touched on yet?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. We've got 10 very specific recommendations. I mentioned a few of them earlier on. The notion of a federal technology agency, repealing Section 230, banning anonymity, having an age limit for kids going on the internet. And then this manifesto idea, the golden rule, protecting data, having data portability. We talk a little bit in the book about the work that Tim Berners-Lee is doing. So people who know Tim Berners-Lee, the sort of original granddaddy of the World Wide Web, his new organization's got this thing called Solid. Maybe some people have heard of this. Very interesting to check this out. And it's this idea that rather than your code halo, your digital fingerprint that I talked earlier on about, your data being owned by the technology provider, you have a pod where your data is held, and then you grant permission for Facebook or Google or Amazon to take data, appropriate controlled data, out of that pod, rather than them own that data on you. And so we talk about things like that. There's a lot of different ideas in the report, and people should check it out.
Yeah. So normally I ask, do you see any fixes that could be easily implemented to help this along? And you've mentioned, a number of things. Are any of those, like, maybe, I don't want to say a quick fix, but are they more easily attainable, or are there other things that people could do now
Yeah,
to make things go better?
that's a great question. I mean, I think there aren't simple answers, because these are complicated issues. And if there were simple, easy fixes, I think probably we'd have had them by now. I think a lot of it comes from having people at the top of the political tree who understand what's going on. Again, this is why we're calling for this idea of a federal technology agency. which mirrors the development and the introduction of the Food and Drug Administration. People know the story of that in the 1920s in America. Sort of came out of a number of health scares, food-based scares, poisoning, and issues in the food supply chain, where people realized we couldn't allow this unregulated environment to continue. We needed to kind of have better regulations and rules to keep people safe. That's the parallel for now, 100 years later. So it really starts at the top, if you like, of having people who are not asking in Senate hearings, what's your business model? Or, Senator, we sell ads. If you remember that moment a few years ago when Mark Zuckerberg was on being questioned by senators, and he had to explain to a senator, what the business model was. That wasn't a very encouraging sign of somebody who, in a very important political position, would have enough knowledge to be able to craft these new rules of the road. They didn't really even understand what was going on in the road. So we need politicians, we need the political infrastructure to do that. So that's not easy, putting that in place. But at the same time, there are individual, easier solutions that we can take. I mean, you can use tools and technologies that don't share data so easily. People may know things like Signal, they may know things like DuckDuckGo. You can begin to control your own personal data more than the vast majority of people are doing now. So I don't think there's anything easy, but it's going to be a combination of societal things, individual things, legislative things, but also attitudinal things. And ultimately, I think all of those elements have a role to play. That's why we talk about them all, because we're trying to, as I said earlier on, sort of provoke and prod and nudge people that this is a very important time in human history when sort of the architecture of the future is being created. And we as individuals, we as citizens, we as people of goodwill, particularly people who love technology, we've got to play a role in shaping the future that we want.
So now I have a bit of a lighthearted question. A lot of scientists I talk to say that they were motivated to get into science by Star Trek, because of Star Trek. So I'm just curious. I think you're a Star Trek fan. Do you want to just quickly mention how that motivated you? And
Yeah, no, I was a huge Trekkie when I was a kid. In fact, I stumbled across is it 1984, the Search for Spock movie on the TV last night. It looked terribly dated and not as cool as I remembered. I think they went off the rails themselves a little bit then, didn't they? But no, the original Star Trek was fabulous. I loved it, and I think what appealed to me, Chris, in a way, was that it wasn't so much about the shoot 'em up kind of cowboys and Indians kind of style of George Lucas. It wasn't the kind of Western in space or the Second World War movie in space that the Star Wars franchise is more about. I mean, it sounds pretentious, and maybe I'm misremembering it, but to me, Star Trek, the original Star Trek, was more about ideas. It was almost, for kids, young adults, it was almost a philosophical show. It was asking big questions about freedom and many of the questions we're asking now about freedom and control and how can people live together and how can we be good humans and how can we make the world better. And I found that very inspiring and interesting. And I think that show and Space Odyssey, 2001 Space Odyssey, which blew my mind when I saw it. I read the book, I read the Arthur C. Clarke book, I suppose when I was about 14 or so. I remember sitting in the garden one summer in England and reading that and just kind of going, wow, this is amazing. Little did I know, here's an interesting fact for you, Chris, little did I know that I lived 4 miles from where that movie was shot.
Oh.
You think that's all in Hollywood, but there's actually a big sound stage in North London where I grew up. And so Kubrick was literally 4 miles down the road from where I was sitting in the garden, and this amazing world, which I thought was out there and I thought was in Hollywood, was, if I'd only known, I could have got on my bike and just ridden down and seen it.
Is it Pinewood Studios?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
yeah,
Um, so with your futurist hat on and also
yeah.
thinking about science entertainment, do you think the entertainment industry is doing enough or the right things to teach people about the future and technology, or is it just kind of scaremongering and myth making right now?
That's a great question. No, I think about that a lot. I mean, in fact, last night we watched that movie Her. Do you know the
Mm,
one with Joaquin Phoenix again, where he's Samantha is his virtual assistant, and he falls in love with her. It's
yeah.
a great movie, and it's interesting because that's 7 years old now, and
Mhm.
if you remember, it did seem very science fiction, but it's basically Alexa, Siri. I mean, it's really come true in a kind of incredibly fast rate. One of the things we've thought, that it would be good if, the industrial entertainment complex spent more time on,
Mhm.
was creating role models for young people in STEM-based fields, in technology-based fields. I can't help thinking that the surplus or the surfeit of doctors and lawyers that we've got now is because in the 80s there was some Elsewhere and ER and Boston Legal and all these medical shows and legal shows. Young people saw that, they thought, this is cool, I'll go into that area.
Yeah.
The only sort of tech shows on TV today are kind of, they present they're nerdy young people, not particularly, almost figures of fun.
Mhm.
I think if we could, and I've proposed this idea to a few people, it's never seemed to have gone very far. Maybe somebody's listening now that could do something about this. But if we could create role models for young people, showing them, the cool things about space and about AI and automation and quantum computing, and
Mhm.
not just presenting this dystopian view that Star Trek, that Hollywood tends to have, because it's kind of the path of least resistance in a way,
Mhm.
but a more nuanced view of, there's really cool things to be done here and very positive things to be done for society. I think that would be a good counterpoint to a lot of that kind of Black Mirror dystopia, which, although I enjoy and is sort of fun,
Mhm.
it really only presents kind of one side of the story, if you like.
Did you write your book because you saw more pessimism than optimism, or just because there was too much pessimism?
No, that's exactly the case, Chris. When we wrote that last book, What to Do When Machines Do Everything, we would go out and tell the story about AI and machine learning, and again try to address this concern about automation, but sort of provide a more positive counterpoint to that argument that 47% of jobs are going to be automated away by technology. But we realized, on the road telling that story back in the days when we could travel,
Mhm.
going into boardrooms and big conference rooms, that these concerns are very real, very tangible, even amongst senior people in big businesses who were sort of, on the one hand, deploying these technologies,
Mhm.
but then on the other, quietly saying to us, well, Ben, what's my son going to do? That sort of dichotomy was very real. And I think out of that, sense of what people were interested in, and that feedback that we were getting from that last book, that's when we really started thinking that, whilst a lot of these technologies do have a lot of upside and individually can be quite benign, this sort of collision was having, a real and troubling impact. And that was really this notion of the monster that we were creating unwittingly, perhaps. And then the notion of, well, how do we tame it? How do we get on top of it?
Is there as much pessimism like this in China or India? Do you know?
That's a great question. I think it's pretty widely distributed, to be honest, Chris. Yeah, I mean, Putin has famously said the country that controls AI is going to control the world.
Hmm.
And the Chinese understand that. I think the West has been a little slow to wake up to realizing that, but now is beginning to grapple with that. You saw the big Eric Schmidt report a couple of weeks ago on AI and national security being published.
Hmm.
I think there is a concern, certainly amongst in India. A lot of the sort of tech people there understand these trends and understand that that pace of automation is accelerating, and that's both an opportunity and a challenge to kind of the traditional Indian labor arbitrage outsourcing based model, which Cognizant's obviously benefited from and leveraged.
Mhm.
So I think the trends are universally understood. Um, Obviously, getting a detailed read and in particularly China is hard.
Hmm.
So I don't, I couldn't give you quite as clear a read on that, if you like, as I could of other parts of the world. But I think people do understand the stakes in at play here.
How come Indonesia comes to mind? That has a huge population. Are they not huge players in the digital economy?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Very good observation. I mean, there are certainly digital platforms, comms channels, social networks, payment models, payment networks there
Mhm.
that are very digitally intensive and are becoming very, very popular. But yeah, you're right. Indonesia is a huge population, not particularly connected into a lot of these discussions at the moment,
Hmm.
seemingly. But no, I'm sure there are people there that are thinking about this sort of stuff as well.
If and I just have a couple more questions. I'll wrap it up soon.
Yeah.
If the digital economy is more, if it becomes more of a national security issue or not just the economy, but advanced science and electronics, if it
Yeah.
becomes a big security issue, that seems like that's less of an opportunity for the world to come together on these issues, that there's going to be more division.
Yeah, no, I think that's very, very true and troubling. Going back to this notion of the splinter net, going back to concerns the West has at the moment about chip fabrication in Taiwan and the future of Taiwan. Yeah, the future of this digital story is really the future of geopolitics.
Hmm.
Just as the geopolitics of the 15th and 16th century was all about how good were your sailing ships, how fast were your sailing ships, how
Hmm.
quickly could you get tea back to the UK or ammo out into Hong Kong.
Hmm.
The same is true now. What are your digital supply routes? What are your digital information chains? What are your vulnerabilities within that? And the scary thing about what's going on in cybersecurity and cyber geopolitics at the moment is how much of it is completely hidden from view, not only just to us as civilians, but frankly, I told on very good authority by the players themselves. If you think back to the notion of MAD,
Hmm.
back in the Cold War, mutually assured destruction,
Hmm.
what kept the détente between the West and Russia at that time was a pretty good understanding of the capability of the other party. Both sides knew that the first strike was going to, basically wipe both of them out. So that tension, even though it sort of flared up at times, Bay of Pigs and things like that, that tension was to a degree quite stable. Uh, the same is not true at all of mutually assured digital destruction, because we don't know the capability of other parties around the world. They don't really know our capabilities. We don't really know the strength of our capabilities. It's been said, and I think this is in the public domain, that the West could basically turn off every street light outside of the West if it wanted to, through things like Stuxnet. But what would that do? What would that create? The war games, if you like, the digital war games, to understand the consequences, the first, second, third, fourth order consequences of doing things like that, we don't really know. And we've been trying to play defense against cyber attacks, advanced persistent threats for a while now,
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't seem to be working. One of the jobs of the future, going back to that report we talked about, was a cyber attack agent. Inverting the sort of model that the West's got at the moment to just play defense, but to go on the attack and basically take out, the capabilities of some of our opponents. But it's very, very complicated. And again, going back to that thought that there are political leaders who don't really understand the business model of the internet, I think the same is true that there are political leaders and defense-based leaders who don't really understand the rules of this game that we're playing, and that's obviously very, very troubling.
It seems that if a country's population isn't digitally minded enough, its leaders aren't going to be either, and that might cause, that country might fail.
Yeah, no, again, it's troubling, and hence why this notion of an FTA, Federal Technology Agency or Administration, is important, because we need to have people making these very important decisions who really understand in great detail what's going on. I think that the troubling answer is, at the moment, we don't. We have a generation of leadership, particularly senior leadership, who don't understand this game. And how can you craft rules and then police be the umpire of a game that you don't really understand? That just is nonsensical, frankly.
Yeah. So we've touched on this, I think, a bit before, but what excites you? Turning from that discussion, what excites you about the future?
Oh, so many things, Chris. Again, that's comes back to the opening line of the book. We love technology, and we completely believe in the power of technology to create, positive outcomes. What excites me, the thing that kind of constantly blows my mind at the moment, well, two things constantly blow my mind at the moment. People who are following the developments in quantum computing, peer-reviewed research coming out of Google, Alphabet, saying that they've developed quantum computing power that can process a calculation in 200 seconds that would take the fastest existing classical supercomputer 10,000 years to process. So if you think about that acceleration, that exponential growth in the raw compute power of quantum, I mean, this is how we get into Star Trek. This is how we build Star Trek and the future that we've seen in the movies. So that's super exciting, and open up whole new vistas of medical research, research in materials, quantum-based materials can have this be 100 times stronger than steel and 100 times lighter than a feather. So think about a quantum-based car, electric vehicle. Think about a car that's incredibly strong. Tiger Woods would like to drive that, and incredibly light, what that would do for its power requirements. I mean, again, so that there are things like that which are super exciting. The other thing that we're big on, we've written about, and in fact is another place of the future, is the whole VR world, virtual reality world. We could talk again for another hour about that now. We're on the cusp of opening up this new paradigm, a new place. And we'll be having meetings like this, and we'll be doing interviews like this in a VR environment in a couple of clicks. Apparently 20% of people in Facebook are working on VR-based projects now. Apple are rumored to be readying a big VR and augmented reality launch for early next year. So again, that's super exciting to think about the possibilities of what we'll be able to do with that, the creative expression will be able to kind of manifest, the technical jobs, creative jobs business jobs that will be opening up in a new place for the future, and that's something we're excited about as well.
I imagine, and in your book, you mentioned people already becoming cyborgs. I imagine with individuals could become almost superhuman, like with the knowledge and materials they might have access to. And
Yeah.
do we ethically and philosophically, are we up to that challenge?
Yeah, well, again, that's why we have to ask these questions. People will know Walter Isaacson and his new book about the developers of CRISPR technology, and this is the question he asks, in that book, is just the ethics of doing cut and paste of human DNA. I mean, I've always thought that this notion that quite well researched and quite well talked about, that on the spectrum of autism, creativity is just a click away from autism.
Hmm.
And so if we take autism out of the human spectrum, do we inadvertently, and not understanding the consequence, do we take creativity out of the human genome? Yeah. I mean, so there are very big questions that we have to ask, and questions like that. And to your point about, Elon Musk's Neuralink, this notion of a kind of digital brain interface, again, it sounds exciting, it sounds amazing, and it could open up huge new areas for medical research, for, as you say, for superhuman intelligence. But again, in this monster book, we're sort of asking these questions that we tend to rush into these phases of innovation and disruption, and not really worry about thinking about it too much. And then we wake up a decade or so later, like we've done with social media and young people with phones, and we've sort of realized what we've done. And when the stakes keep on getting higher and higher, changing the human genome, interfering with our very brains, again, that's why we're sort of saying, people like us who love tech, we've got to do this properly. We've got to do this seriously. We've got to think about this, just rather than rushing in and breaking things, moving fast and breaking things, because we've seen what we've broken, and a lot of the stuff we've broken hasn't been particularly good.
So what projects are you working on right now that you'd like to mention?
Well, obviously we're out promoting this book, Monster, available at all good bookstores if they're open in your neighborhood, and online. Yeah. We're talking about this 21 Places of the Future report that we're just launching as well. People can find us at the Center for the Future of Work at Cognizant pretty easily, and we're always writing, always talking, always sharing opinions about what's going on. So yeah, that's what we're up to, Chris.
So what's the website for listeners and viewers?
It's just CFOW.com, centerforthefuturework.com. Just put that into your browser. You'll find us pretty easily.
Can you spell that letter for letter, just so I get it right?
Yeah, so www.cognizant.com/futurework.com.
Okay, and Cognizant is?
Cognizant is COGNIZANT.
Okay, all right, just to make it easy for people.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Go right to it. All right, well, that's all the questions I have. Do you have any parting thoughts or words?
No, thanks, Chris. Great talking to you. Enjoyed the conversation.
You too. Thank you. I appreciate your time, taking your time.
Thanks very much.
In the next episode, I speak with Barbara Scalvini about how the ideas of Aristotle were transmitted through the medieval and Renaissance ages. Space Dock the subscribe button to catch that episode. Thank you for watching this video version of Technology in Space. If you like the episode, please subscribe and hit the like button. If you'd like more books and information on space history or the science, technology, and business of space, check out my YouTube channel, Spacewalks Money Talks, my podcast, Technology in Space, and my website, technologyandspace.com. If you're looking for military history and general history, including true crime, please check out my YouTube channel, War Scholar, my podcast, Military History Inside Out, and my webpage, warscholar.org or militaryhistorypodcast.com. If you're looking for fiction, including sci-fi, horror, fantasy, mysteries, thrillers, film history, gaming, and more, please check out my YouTube channel, Chris Alvarez Full Contact Nerd, my podcast, Full Contact Nerd Interviews, and my webpage, chrisalvarez.com or fullcontactnerd.com. Thank you for watching.